It always starts in the quiet hours. When the world finally stops demanding your attention, when the noise fades and all that's left is the hum of your own nervous system and the glow of a screen that hasn't moved in hours. 3 in the morning. The exact hour where avoidance stops being a strategy and starts feeling like a verdict. You lie there, replaying conversations that never happened, tracing the exact moment the tone shifted, the exact sentence that made them pull back, the exact silence that replaced warmth. You've memorized the distance. You've learned to read the micro-withdrawals, the delayed replies, the sudden emotional climate change that leaves you wondering what you did wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. You just existed too loudly in a space where someone learned to survive by disappearing. And now you're holding the weight of a ghost, waiting for it to turn around and acknowledge you. But ghosts don't turn around. They drift. And you've been standing in the current, arms outstretched, hoping the tide will carry them back to you. Let's say the quiet truth out loud, even if it cuts. Your waiting isn't devotion. It's panic dressed as loyalty. You keep reaching, explaining, softening, accommodating, trying to bridge the gap with more of yourself, as if love is a math problem and the right amount of effort will finally balance the equation. But you're not solving anything. You're feeding a cycle that only grows heavier with your participation. Every message you send into the void, every time you shrink your needs to make room for their absence, every moment you convince yourself that patience will eventually reward you, you're reinforcing the very dynamic that keeps you stranded. You think if you just stay steady enough, warm enough, available enough, they'll eventually feel safe. But safety isn't built on your exhaustion. Safety is built on boundaries. And the brutal reality you've been circling but refusing to name is this. Your pursuit isn't pulling them closer. It's teaching them how far they can step back before you break. They don't run because you're unlovable. They run because closeness triggers a neurological alarm they never learned how to disarm. Inside an avoidant nervous system, intimacy doesn't register as comfort. It registers as threat. The amygdala doesn't distinguish between a lover moving in and a predator closing in. It just fires. Cortisol floods the bloodstream. The chest tightens. The throat closes. The mind starts cataloging exits. This isn't conscious. It's wiring. Somewhere along the line, attachment became entangled with suffocation, and the body learned to protect itself by creating distance before the distance could be forced upon it. So when you lean in, when you ask for reassurance, when you show up with your full emotional weight, their system doesn't read it as connection. It reads it as pressure. And the only language their nervous system knows in that moment is retreat. They pull away not to punish you, but to regulate themselves. The wall you're hitting isn't indifference. It's a flooded circuit board. You can't reason with a drowning person. You can't negotiate with a nervous system that has decided closeness equals collapse. They didn't stop caring. They short-circuited. The affection was real. The moments of warmth weren't fabricated, but when the emotional current rose past their threshold, the breaker flipped. And now you're standing in a dark room, wondering why the lights went out, not realizing the wiring was never meant to hold that much voltage. You keep trying to hand them more light, more words, more proof, more patience, not seeing that the problem isn't a lack of electricity. The problem is an overloaded system. You've been pouring water into a cup that already has a crack in the base. No amount of pouring fixes the leak. It just makes the floor wetter. And you keep blaming yourself for the mess. You shouldn't. You were just trying to love someone who was taught that love is a risk, not a refuge. There is a way out of this, but it doesn't look like what you've been practicing. It doesn't look like more effort. It looks like less. It looks like strategic silence. Not the heavy, waiting silence that screams inside your chest. Not the silent treatment used as a weapon. The clean, grounded silence of non-reactivity. The kind that comes when you finally stop trying to manage their emotional temperature and start regulating your own. You step out of the dance. You stop mirroring their distance with pursuit. You stop filling the void they leave with your voice. You let the space exist. You let the tension breathe. And in that stillness, something shifts. Not because you're playing a game, but because you're finally honoring your own nervous system enough to stop abandoning yourself for the sake of someone else's comfort. Silence isn't absence. It's presence without performance. It's the decision to stop translating your worth into their responsiveness. It's the moment you realize you don't need to be heard to be whole. Watch what happens when you actually do this. Not for a day, not as a test, but as a realignment. The moment you stop reaching, the emotional gravity changes. Their phone stops lighting up with your name. The predictable rhythm of your pursuit breaks. And their nervous system, which had grown accustomed to your steady supply of attention, suddenly encounters a vacuum. Dopamine doesn't vanish overnight, but the predictable hit does. The brain starts scanning for what it lost. They tell themselves they're relieved. They say they needed space. They convince themselves they're finally free. But relief is a temporary chemical. It fades. And what's left underneath is the quiet realization that the person who kept them anchored to their own emotions is no longer orbiting them. They check their messages. They replay old conversations. They notice the silence you used to fill. And in that noticing, the avoidance starts to crack. Not because you chased them back, because you stopped running toward them. The distance you feared becomes the mirror they finally have to face. You think they're moving on. They're not. They're recalibrating. An avoidant mind doesn't process absence by letting go. It processes it by looping. The brain replays the last moments of warmth, the last text, the last time they felt seen without having to perform for it. They start noticing the gaps they created, the conversations they dodged, the vulnerability they sidestepped, the way they kept one foot out the door while you were building a home inside it. And slowly, the narrative flips. They thought you were the problem because you wanted too much. Now they're realizing the problem was never your desire. It was their inability to hold it. The space you left open isn't empty anymore. It's echoing. And echoes have a way of returning to the source. This is where the power dynamic begins to invert. Not through manipulation, through natural psychological gravity. When you stop being the emotional caretaker of their avoidance, you become the unmovable center. They start testing the waters. A casual message, a sudden memory, a question wrapped in nostalgia. They want to see if you're still waiting. They want to know if the door is still cracked. But you're not at the door anymore. You're in the room. You're living. You're regulating. You're no longer measuring your worth by their proximity. And that's what terrifies them. Not your absence, your autonomy. They thought your love was conditional on their presence. They're learning it's unconditional on their performance. The chase reverses because you stopped being the target and became the origin. They don't miss you because you left. They miss you because you finally stayed with yourself. But here's the warning, and you need to hear it clearly. Their return will not look like transformation. It will look like hunger. It will come wrapped in familiarity, in sudden warmth, in promises that sound exactly like the ones that broke your heart before. They will want the comfort of your consistency without offering the security of their own. They will reach out when the loneliness peaks, when the dopamine dip becomes unbearable, when the mirror gets too sharp to ignore. And your nervous system will recognize the old rhythm. It will want to step back into the dance. It will tell you, this is the moment you've been waiting for. It will whisper that if you just answer, if you just soften, if you just give them one more chance, everything will finally align. Don't. Breaking your silence for their comfort is how you trap yourself back inside the cycle. Closure doesn't come from their words. It comes from your refusal to negotiate your worth for crumbs of attention. If you step back into the old pattern the moment they show a flicker of interest, you teach them that your boundaries are temporary, that your silence is a performance, that your stillness is just another form of waiting. And it isn't. It's your foundation. Protect it like your life depends on it, because it does. The truth you've been avoiding isn't about them. It's about you. It's about the part of you that believes love requires self-erasure, that believes staying is strength and leaving is failure, that believes if you just endure enough distance, you'll eventually earn proximity. You won't. You'll just exhaust yourself into compliance. The pattern only breaks when you stop treating their avoidance as a puzzle to solve and start treating your own worth as a fact to defend. You don't need to convince them to stay. You need to convince yourself that you deserve someone who doesn't make you beg for basic emotional presence. You don't need to decode their silence. You need to trust your own. You don't need to fix their nervous system. You need to honor yours. This is where the shift happens. Not in a dramatic confrontation, not in a final text. In the quiet decision to stop outsourcing your peace to someone who doesn't know how to hold it. You wake up one morning and realize you haven't checked their profile in days. You catch yourself breathing without the familiar weight of anticipation pressing on your ribs. You notice that the silence you used to fear is now the space where you hear yourself think. You start recognizing that love shouldn't feel like holding your breath until someone decides to exhale. You start understanding that attachment isn't measured by how long you wait. It's measured by how completely you show up for yourself when no one else does. You stop romanticizing their distance. You stop translating their retreat into a reflection of your value. You stop believing that if you just become smaller, quieter, more manageable, they'll finally feel safe enough to stay. Safety isn't earned through self-diminishment. It's built through mutual presence. And you won't find it by shrinking. You'll find it by standing. You are not the aftermath of their avoidance. You are the origin of your own reclamation. The nights you spent staring at the ceiling, wondering what you did wrong, were not wasted. They were the furnace where your old identity burned. The version of you that believed love meant endurance is gone. The version that confused persistence with devotion is fading. What's emerging is quieter, sharper, unshakable. You don't need to announce your worth. You embody it. You don't need to prove you're enough. You stop asking the question. You start living from the answer. The power you've been searching for in their attention was always yours. It just got buried under years of trying to make someone else comfortable with your existence. You're done with that. You're done translating your depth into their capacity. You're done apologizing for needing what you deserve. You're done waiting for someone to choose you when you haven't fully chosen yourself. 3 a.m. will come again. The quiet will return. The screen will glow. But this time, you won't be staring at it, waiting for a sign. You'll be breathing through it, feeling the steady rhythm of a nervous system that's finally learning to regulate itself. You'll feel the old ache rise, and instead of chasing it, you'll let it pass. You'll recognize it for what it is, not a prophecy, not a punishment, just a memory of a pattern you're no longer feeding. The avoidant mind will do what it's always done.
It will run, it will loop, it will test, it will return when the silence gets too loud. But you won't be there to catch them. You'll be somewhere else entirely. Anchored, rooted, unavailable for the same dance. Not out of bitterness, out of clarity. You've learned the difference between love and dependency, between patience and self-abandonment, between holding space and holding your breath. You don't need their return to validate your healing. You don't need their apology to close the chapter. You don't need their consistency to prove you were worthy of it. You already are. The truth they're running from at 3 a.m. isn't about you at all. It's about them. It's about the cost of a life built on distance. It's about the quiet terror of realizing that the person who loved them most consistently is finally loving themselves more. And you? You're done waiting for them to catch up. You're already walking. The silence isn't empty anymore. It's full of you. And for the first time, that's enough.